Have you ever heard whispers about the small towns of Indiana? The kind of whispers that make you question what lies beneath the pristine facades of rural America. In 1906, one such whisper grew into a scream that was quickly silenced. A scream that still echoes today, if you know where to listen. Before you continue watching this video, I need you to comment below where you're from. This helps us understand who our audience is. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so now. Your support is crucial for us to continue sharing these hidden stories that others try to bury. The discovery was made on a crisp October morning in 1906, the kind of morning where frost clung to every surface like a warning, a harbinger of the winter to come. Sheriff Thomas Caldwell of Marion County had received an anonymous letter directing him to an abandoned well on the outskirts of Indianapolis. The letter, written in a neat, educated hand, simply stated, "You'll find what you've been looking for at the Whitaker property. Look down the old well." Sheriff Caldwell was not a superstitious man. Having served in law enforcement for 17 years, he had seen his fair share of anonymous tips that led nowhere, but something about the precision of the handwriting, the confidence of the message, compelled him to investigate. He gathered 3 of his deputies, William Hargrove, Joseph Miller, and Franklin Davis, and they set out for the Whitaker property before dawn. The Whitaker land had been vacant for nearly 2 years. The family had moved west after losing much of their fortune in bad investments. The property, once one of the most prestigious in the county, now stood in disrepair. The main house, a Victorian mansion with intricate woodwork and tall windows, loomed against the skyline like a forgotten monument to better times. "I don't like this, Sheriff," Deputy Miller said as they approached the old well, which sat about 50 yards from the back of the house. "This place gives me the creeps." Sheriff Caldwell didn't respond. He was focused on the task at hand. The well had been capped with wooden planks that were now weathered and warped from exposure to the elements. It took the combined strength of all 4 men to remove the covering. The smell hit them first. A putrid, sickly sweet odor that made Deputy Hargrove turn away and vomit into the frost-covered grass. Sheriff Caldwell covered his nose and mouth with a handkerchief and peered down into the darkness. "Get the lantern," he ordered, his voice muffled behind the cloth. Deputy Davis lowered the lantern into the well. At first, they could see nothing but the stone walls descending into darkness. Then, about 20 feet down, the light caught something unnatural, something that didn't belong in an abandoned well. Hair. Human hair woven into a thick braid that hung from a hook embedded in the wall of the well. "Lord Almighty," whispered Sheriff Caldwell. "Davis, go back to the horses and get the rope. We need to retrieve whatever that is." What they retrieved would shake the foundations of Marion County and send ripples of fear throughout the state of Indiana. The braid, nearly 6 feet long, was actually multiple braids woven together. But what turned the deputy's blood cold were the small metal tags attached at various points along the length of hair. Each tag was engraved with a name and a date. Elizabeth Chambers, March 3, 1904. Catherine Willoughby, July 17, 1904. Margaret Simmons, October 9, 1904. Anne Porter, January 1, 1905. Sarah Kingsley, May 12, 1905. Ruth Bennett, September 28, 1905. Mary Adams, February 5, 1906. Dorothea Walsh, June 30, 1906. 8 names, 8 women, all reported missing over the past 2 years. "This can't be," muttered Deputy Miller, his face pale. "Some of these women disappeared from towns 50 miles apart. We all thought they were isolated incidents." Sheriff Caldwell examined the braid more closely. The hair varied in color, blonde, brown, red, black, and texture. There was no doubt in his mind that he was looking at the hair of 8 different women, meticulously braided together like some kind of grotesque trophy. "We need to bring this back to town immediately," he said, carefully wrapping the braid in a clean cloth. "And not a word of this to anyone until we've had time to investigate further. Understood?" The deputies nodded. too shocked to speak. None of them noticed the figure watching from an upper window of the Whitaker house. By the time they looked up, the curtain had already fallen back into place. The news of the discovery spread through Marion County like wildfire, despite Sheriff Caldwell's attempts to keep it quiet. By nightfall, rumors had transformed from whispers to shouts, and a crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office, demanding answers. Among them was Harold Chambers, the husband of Elizabeth Chambers, the first woman named on the tags. "I have a right to know what you found," he shouted, his voice breaking with emotion. "My Lizzie's been gone for over 2 years, 2 years of not knowing." Sheriff Caldwell invited Harold into his office, away from the crowd. The man collapsed into a chair, his face lined with grief and exhaustion. Did you find her body?" Harold asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, Mr. Chambers. We've only found evidence that may be connected to her disappearance. I need you to tell me everything you remember about the day she vanished." Harold's eyes took on a distant look. It was a Tuesday, March 3rd, 1904. Lizzie had gone to visit her sister in Noblesville. She was supposed to return on the afternoon train, but she never arrived. At first I thought maybe she'd decided to stay another day, but when I telegraphed her sister, she said Lizzie had boarded the train as planned. Sheriff Caldwell made notes as Harold spoke. "Did your wife typically wear her hair long?" The question seemed to catch Harold off guard. "Yes, down to her waist almost. She was very proud of it. Golden blonde, like wheat in the summer." "Why do you ask?" The sheriff hesitated. "We found something that may be connected to her case, but I'm not at liberty to discuss the details yet. I promise you, Mr. Chambers, we're doing everything we can to find out what happened to Elizabeth and the others." "Others?" Harold's eyes widened. "You mean there's more than just Lizzie?" Sheriff Caldwell realized his mistake too late. "Please, Mr. Chambers, I need you to keep this information confidential for now. Yes, we believe several disappearances over the past 2 years may be connected. That's all I can say at this time." After Harold left, Sheriff Caldwell summoned his deputies for a private meeting. "We need to contact the families of all 8 women named on those tags, discreetly. I want to confirm if all of them were known for their hair." The investigation revealed a pattern that chilled even the most seasoned law enforcement officers. All 8 women had been described by their families as having exceptionally beautiful hair. All had disappeared while traveling alone, usually between towns, and all had vanished without a trace. No luggage found, no signs of struggle, no witnesses who remembered seeing anything unusual. The discovery prompted Sheriff Caldwell to reach out to law enforcement in neighboring counties. As reports came in, a geographical pattern began to emerge. The disappearances formed a rough circle around Indianapolis, with the furthest victim taken from a town nearly 60 miles from the city. "He's working his way around in a circle," Sheriff Caldwell explained to his deputies, pointing to a map where he had marked each disappearance with a red pin. Starting with Elizabeth Chambers in the north, then moving east with Catherine Willoughby, south with Margaret Simmons, and so on. The latest victim, Dorothea Walsh, was taken from the northwest. If he maintains this pattern, the next victim will likely come from the northeast again, completing the circle. "But why?" asked Deputy Hargrove. "What's the purpose of this collection?" Before the sheriff could respond, a young officer burst into the room. "Sheriff, there's been another disappearance. A woman named Lucille Parker from Fisher's. Her husband reported her missing this morning when she didn't return from visiting a friend in Indianapolis yesterday." Sheriff Caldwell's face darkened. Fisher's lay to the northeast of Indianapolis, exactly where he had predicted the next disappearance would occur. "Get your gear," he ordered his deputies, "and send telegrams to every law enforcement office in the state. We're looking for a man who targets women with distinctive hair. He may work for the railroad or as a driver of some kind, given his ability to intercept women during travel, and he's escalating. The time between abductions is getting shorter." As the investigation intensified, another anonymous letter arrived at the sheriff's office. This one contained a single sheet of paper with a poem written in the same neat handwriting as the first letter. Beauty woven into art, 8 strands now form a part of my masterpiece divine. Soon the 9th shall make it mine. When the circle is complete, my collection grows more sweet. Look, but never shall you find the artist with the gifted mind. Attached to the letter was a single lock of dark brown hair, tied with a silk ribbon. "He's taunting us," growled Sheriff Caldwell. "He knows we're looking for him." The investigation took a surprising turn when Deputy Davis discovered a connection between the missing women that had been overlooked. All 8 had visited the same photography studio in Indianapolis within 2 months of their disappearances. Hollister's fine portraiture on Meridian Street had been in business for over a decade and was known for its quality work and reasonable prices. "It could be coincidence," Deputy Davis admitted. "Hollister's is one of the most popular studios in the city, but it's the only common thread we've found so far." Sheriff Caldwell decided it was worth investigating. He and Deputy Miller visited the studio the next morning, posing as potential customers. Hollister's fine portraiture was an elegant establishment with velvet curtains and ornate furniture. The walls were lined with examples of the photographer's work, mostly family portraits and individual studies. A bell chimed as they entered, and a moment later a man emerged from a back room. "Good morning, gentlemen. Welcome to Hollister's. I'm Edwin Hollister, the proprietor. How may I assist you today?" Edwin Hollister was in his early 40s, with thinning brown hair and spectacles. He had an artistic air about him, dressed in a well-tailored suit with a silk scarf at his throat. His hands, Sheriff Caldwell noted, were stained with the chemicals used in developing photographs. "My daughter's getting married next month," Sheriff Caldwell lied smoothly. "We're interested in having portraits done before the wedding. I've heard good things about your work." "How wonderful." Hollister smiled, gesturing to the portraits on the wall. "As you can see, capturing life's precious moments is my specialty. Does your daughter have any specific style in mind?" "She has beautiful hair," Sheriff Caldwell said, watching Hollister's reaction closely. "Long, auburn hair. She's very proud of it. We'd want to make sure the portrait highlights that feature. If Hollister found the comment strange, he didn't show it. I often advise my female clients on how best to style their hair for portraits. The right arrangement can dramatically improve a composition. Perhaps your daughter would like to see some examples of my work with other young ladies." Hollister led them to an album containing portraits of women. Sheriff Caldwell's heart raced as he recognized several faces: Elizabeth Chambers, Catherine Willoughby, Margaret Simmons, all women whose names had been on the tags of the braided hair. "These are exquisite," Sheriff Caldwell said, keeping his voice steady. "You have a real talent for capturing beauty." "Beauty is everything in my profession," Hollister replied with a slight bow. "I merely preserve what nature has already perfected." As they were about to leave, Sheriff Caldwell noticed a door behind the counter, partially open. Through the gap, he could see what appeared to be a workshop, with various tools hanging on the wall. Among them, he glimpsed what looked like a collection of scissors and sharp implements. "Your studio is quite impressive, Mr. Hollister," Sheriff Caldwell commented. "Do you work alone, or do you have assistants?" "I have an assistant who helps with the chemical processes," Hollister explained, "and occasionally I employ young ladies to assist with female clients, helping them with their hair and attire. It makes the subjects more comfortable." Outside the studio, Deputy Miller expressed his suspicions. "Did you see how he lit up when you mentioned hair? And those portraits of the missing women? It's too much of a coincidence." "I agree, but we need more evidence before we can make a move," Sheriff Caldwell replied. "We need to find out more about Hollister's background and his assistant, and we need to locate Lucille Parker before she becomes the 9th strand in his sick collection." The investigation into Edwin Hollister revealed troubling details. He had moved to Indianapolis 8 years ago from Boston, where he had also worked as a photographer. Before that, he had spent time in Europe studying art and photography. There was a 3-year gap in his history that they couldn't account for between 1897 and 1900. Sheriff Caldwell assigned Deputy Hargrove to watch Hollister's studio while he and the other deputies continued to search for Lucille Parker. Days passed with no sign of the missing woman and no unusual activity from Hollister. Then, on the 7th day of surveillance, Deputy Hargrove observed Hollister leaving his studio late at night with a large trunk. Hollister loaded the trunk into a carriage and drove out of the city. Hargrove followed at a distance, careful not to be seen. The carriage travelled north for about an hour before turning onto a narrow country road. Hargrove was forced to abandon his horse and continue on foot to avoid detection. Through the trees, he saw the carriage stop in front of a small cottage deep in the woods. Hollister unloaded the trunk and carried it inside. Hargrove crept closer to the cottage. Through a window, he could see Hollister moving around inside, lighting lamps and preparing what appeared to be photographic equipment. Then, to Hargrove's horror, Hollister opened the trunk and helped a woman out. A woman who matched the description of Lucille Parker. She appeared to be in a daze, moving slowly and without resistance, as Hollister seated her in a chair. Hargrove watched as Hollister carefully brushed the woman's long, dark hair, speaking to her in tones too low to hear from outside. Knowing he needed to act quickly, but also that he couldn't overpower Hollister alone, Hargrove retreated into the woods and rode as fast as he could back to Indianapolis to alert Sheriff Caldwell. By the time Sheriff Caldwell and a group of armed deputies arrived at the cottage, it was nearly dawn. They surrounded the small building, and the sheriff called out for Hollister to surrender. There was no response. After several more warnings, they broke down the door and entered. The cottage contained a fully equipped photographic studio and darkroom. On the walls hung portraits, not ordinary portraits, but disturbing images of women in various stages of unconsciousness, their hair arranged in elaborate styles. In some of the later photographs, the women appeared to be dead, their faces waxy and still, but their hair meticulously arranged. But there was no sign of Hollister or Lucille Parker. In the center of the main room stood a table covered with a white cloth. On it lay a woman's nightgown, scissors, combs, and several empty glass bottles that smelled of chloroform. Beside these items was a book, a journal written in the same neat handwriting as the anonymous letters. Sheriff Caldwell opened the journal and began to read. The collection grows more beautiful with each edition. Their essence, their very soul, captured forever in the strands I preserve. They do not understand the honor I bestow upon them, to be part of something eternal, something divine. The circle nears completion. Soon the transformation will begin, and I shall become what I was always meant to be. The rest of the journal detailed Hollister's process, how he identified women with exceptional hair during photography sessions, tracked their movements, and eventually abducted them using chloroform. He kept them drugged in this remote cottage while he photographed them, then ultimately killed them, preserving only their hair as trophies. But the most disturbing revelation came from the final pages of the journal. The Whitaker house calls to me. It has whispered its secrets, shown me the path. In its walls lie the remnants of those who came before me, the collectors of beauty from centuries past. I am but the latest in a long line of artists. And like them, when my work is complete, I shall join my collection in transformation. A thorough search of the cottage revealed a hidden cellar, accessed through a trapdoor in the floor. Inside, they found Lucille Parker, bound and unconscious, but alive. There was also evidence that the other 8 women had been kept there at different times. Personal effects, scraps of clothing, scratched messages on the stone walls. But of Edwin Hollister, there was no trace. The search for Hollister expanded across the state and beyond. His photograph was distributed to law enforcement agencies throughout the Midwest. But as weeks passed with no sightings, Sheriff Caldwell became convinced that the photographer had fled the country. Lucille Parker recovered physically from her ordeal, but remained deeply traumatized. She had little memory of her time in captivity, recalling only that Hollister had approached her as she left a friend's house in Indianapolis, offering her a ride in his carriage. The next thing she remembered was waking up in the hospital. The investigation turned back to the Whitaker property, where the braided hair had first been discovered. Historical records revealed a disturbing pattern. The property had changed hands multiple times over the past 50 years, and each time the previous owner had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The Whitakers had been the most recent victims, not having moved west as rumored, but vanishing shortly before the property was abandoned. Excavation of the grounds around the Whitaker house uncovered human remains, dozens of them dating back decades. All showed signs of the same meticulous removal of hair before burial. In a sealed room in the basement of the house, Sheriff Caldwell and his deputies made the most horrifying discovery of all: a collection of human hair dating back generations, preserved and labeled with names and dates. The oldest specimens dated back to 1852. The braided hair they had found in the well was just the latest addition to this gruesome archive. On the wall of this room, written in a substance that appeared to be dried blood, was a message: "The circle is now complete. I have become one with the beauty I collected. Look for me in the faces of strangers, for I am everywhere and nowhere. The tradition continues. Another will take my place as I took the place of those before me. Beauty is eternal. The collection never ends." The case of Edwin Hollister and his horrific collection became one of the most notorious in Indiana's history. Though the immediate threat had been eliminated, the final message left in the Whitaker house basement haunted Sheriff Caldwell until his dying day. He never stopped looking over his shoulder, never stopped scanning the faces of strangers for signs of Hollister. And he never stopped wondering if somewhere, someone new was beginning a collection of their own. In the years that followed, there were whispers of similar cases in other states: Ohio, Illinois, Kentucky, always with the same signature. Women with beautiful hair vanishing without a trace, always with a photographer or artist of some kind at the center of the investigation. Always with the investigators finding evidence of the crimes, but never capturing the perpetrator. The Whitaker property was eventually demolished, the land left vacant, but locals claim that on certain nights, if you stand at the edge of the property where the old well once was, you can hear the whispers of women calling out their names as if introducing themselves to a new arrival: Elizabeth, Catherine, Margaret, Anne, Sarah, Ruth, Mary, Dorothea. And if you listen closely enough, some say you can hear the sound of scissors opening and closing, and the soft voice of a man saying, "Your beauty shall be preserved forever." To this day, in the small towns surrounding Indianapolis, parents warn their daughters to be wary of photographers who pay too much attention to their hair, and they tell them never to travel alone. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the case was discovered many years later, when a researcher looking into the history of the Whitaker property found evidence that the land had once belonged to a religious sect that believed in the power of human hair as a conduit to immortality. They believed that by collecting and preserving the hair of individuals they deemed pure, they could transfer their souls from one vessel to another, achieving a form of eternal life. Was Edwin Hollister a member of this cult? Or was he simply a disturbed individual who had discovered their teachings and adopted them as his own? The truth may never be known. What is certain is that the 8 women whose names were tagged on that braided hair never received proper justice. Their bodies were never found. Their families never had closure. And somewhere, perhaps, their beauty remains preserved in a collection that continues to grow. The tale of the tagged braid of 1906 serves as a grim reminder that evil rarely appears as we expect it to. It hides behind respectable facades, behind artistic talent, behind charming smiles and proper manners, and it waits patiently for the perfect moment to claim its next victim. In these dark times, we must remember to turn to God and Jesus Christ for protection and guidance. For only in the light of divine love can the darkness of human malevolence be truly banished. The investigation into Edwin Hollister's disappearance continued well into 1907, but as months passed with no new leads, public interest in the case began to wane. Sheriff Thomas Caldwell, however, remained obsessed. The photographer's final message, "The circle is now complete. I have become one with the beauty I collected," haunted his dreams. What did he mean by becoming one with the beauty? Caldwell would ask his deputies during late-night strategy sessions. And more importantly, what did he mean about another taking his place? The answers came in the spring of 1907, though no one recognized them for what they were at the time. A young woman named Virginia Ellis arrived in Indianapolis, claiming to be Edwin Hollister's niece. She explained that she had come to settle her uncle's affairs after learning of his disappearance. Virginia was striking in appearance, tall and elegant, with an unusual hair color that seemed to shift between auburn and blonde, depending on the light. She wore it piled high on her head in an elaborate style that drew admiring glances from both men and women. Virginia took over her uncle's photography studio, quickly establishing herself as a talented artist in her own right. Her specialty, she told her clients, was capturing the unique essence of each subject, particularly women with distinctive features. Sheriff Caldwell interviewed Virginia shortly after her arrival in the city. She presented documentation proving her relationship to Hollister, birth certificates, family photographs, letters. Everything appeared to be in order. "I'm devastated by what my uncle is accused of," Virginia told the sheriff, her eyes welling with tears. "Our family had no idea he was capable of such atrocities. I've come here not only to manage his business affairs, but to make amends, in whatever small way I can, to the community he harmed." There was something about Virginia that made Caldwell uneasy, though he couldn't put his finger on what it was. Perhaps it was the way her eyes never seemed to reflect her emotions, remaining cold and calculating even as she wept. Or perhaps it was how she kept touching her elaborately styled hair during their conversation, patting and adjusting it with long, thin fingers that reminded Caldwell uncomfortably of spider legs. Despite his misgivings, Caldwell had no grounds to deny Virginia the right to take over her uncle's business. The studio reopened under the name Ellis Fine Portraiture, and within months it had become even more successful than it had been under Hollister's management. Meanwhile, life in Marion County slowly returned to normal. The Whitaker property was seized by the state, the house boarded up and the grounds fenced off to prevent curiosity seekers from trespassing. The remains found on the property were given proper burials, though most could not be identified due to the state of decomposition. The braided hair and the rest of the collection were locked away in evidence, despite requests from several museums to display them as historical artifacts. A year passed, then two. Sheriff Caldwell remained vigilant, but no new disappearances matching the pattern of Hollister's victims were reported in Indiana or the surrounding states. Gradually, even Caldwell began to believe that perhaps the nightmare had truly ended with Hollister's disappearance. Then, in the summer of 1909, a package arrived at the sheriff's office, addressed personally to Thomas Caldwell. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a letter written in a neat, familiar hand. "My dear Sheriff Caldwell," the letter began, "by the time you read this, I will have completed my transformation and begun anew elsewhere. I thought you, of all people, deserved to understand the work to which I dedicated my life. The enclosed journal explains everything. Guard it well, for it contains secrets that many would kill to possess. Perhaps in time, you too will understand the beauty of what I created. Until we meet again, Edwin Hollister." Caldwell's hands trembled as he opened the journal. The first entry was dated 1897. "Today I met the man who will change my life forever. His name is Wilhelm Schröder, a German photographer with a most unusual speciality. He creates what he calls composite portraits, not through any photographic trick, but through a method so revolutionary, so transcendent, that I hardly dare describe it. He has invited me to his workshop tomorrow to observe his process. I believe I am on the cusp of discovering something extraordinary. The journal chronicled Hollister's apprenticeship with Schroeder, who, it became clear as Caldwell read on, was engaged in activities far more sinister than photography. Schroeder believed that human hair contained the essence of a person's soul, and that by collecting and combining hair from individuals with specific qualities, one could create a vessel capable of housing multiple souls, a kind of immortality through composite identity. "Schroeder has shown me his collection today," wrote Hollister in an entry from 1898. 73 specimens, each tagged with names, dates, and the quality for which they were selected. Beauty, intelligence, artistic talent, physical strength, all preserved with his special solution that keeps the hair as vibrant as the day it was cut. But the true marvel is what he has achieved through combination. A braid of 9 women, all known for their exceptional beauty, woven together with strands of his own hair. He calls it the vessel, and claims that when the time comes, it will allow him to transcend his aging physical form. Caldwell read on, a growing sense of horror building within him as he came to understand what Hollister had been attempting. According to the journal, Schroeder had performed a ritual in 1900 using the braided hair as a conduit to transfer his consciousness into a new body, that of a young woman he had been keeping captive in his workshop. "The transformation was unlike anything I could have imagined," Hollister wrote. Schroeder placed the vessel around the girl's neck, spoke the ancient words he had discovered in his research, and before my eyes I watched as he changed. His body collapsed, empty, while the girl's face transformed subtly, taking on aspects of Schroeder's features. But more than that, her mannerisms, her voice, the very way she moved, all became a blend of her original self and Schroeder. He had done it. He had transcended death by becoming one with his collection. Hollister had then killed Schroeder's empty body and fled back to America, bringing with him the knowledge of the ritual and samples from Schroeder's collection. He had sought out the Whitaker property specifically because of rumors that it had once belonged to a sect with similar beliefs, an American branch of the European cult to which Schroeder had belonged. "I have found their records hidden in a secret compartment beneath the floorboards," an entry from 1904 read. "They were here, practicing the old ways right under the noses of these God-fearing Midwesterners, and they left behind their collection, over 50 specimens dating back to the early 1800s, but more importantly, they left instructions for creating the perfect vessel. 9 women, their hair representing the 9 qualities of the ideal being: beauty, intelligence, youth, fertility, artistic talent, physical grace, emotional depth, spiritual purity, and resilience. When combined correctly, such a vessel can house not just one transferred soul, but many, a composite being of extraordinary power." The final entries detailed Hollister's completion of his own vessel, the braid that had been discovered in the well, and his preparations for the ritual. His last entry, dated the day before Deputy Hargrove had observed him taking Lucille Parker to the cottage, read, "Tomorrow I complete the circle. Lucille Parker will be the 9th addition to my collection, representing resilience. Her hair, black as midnight and strong as wire, is the perfect final component. The vessel is prepared. The ritual site is ready in the basement of the Whitaker house, where so many transformations have occurred before mine. By this time tomorrow, Edwin Hollister will be gone, and I shall be reborn into a form that combines the best qualities of my 9 chosen ones. I wonder what face I shall wear, whose voice will speak my thoughts. It matters not. What matters is the continuity of the work. Schroeder passed the knowledge to me, and I have prepared for another to follow in my footsteps, should anything go wrong. The cycle cannot be broken. The collection must continue to grow." Sheriff Caldwell closed the journal, his mind reeling from what he had read. If Hollister had indeed attempted this ritual of transformation, Then where was Lucille Parker's body? She had been found alive in the cottage cellar, and whose body had Hollister intended to inhabit? A cold realization washed over Caldwell as the pieces fell into place. The niece, Virginia Ellis, with her shifting hair color that seemed to contain hints of blonde, brown, red, and black, just like the combined hair colors of the missing women. Virginia, who had appeared in Indianapolis with impeccable documentation shortly after Hollister's disappearance. Virginia, whose elegant hands moved like those of a photographer accustomed to manipulating delicate equipment. Caldwell rushed to his desk and pulled out the file containing the investigation into Hollister's background. He had claimed to have no living relatives. There had never been any mention of a sister who could have been Virginia's mother. The documentation Virginia had provided, had anyone actually verified it beyond a cursory examination? By the time Caldwell and his deputies arrived at Ellis Fine Portraiture, it was too late. Virginia Ellis had closed the studio 2 days earlier, telling her clients that she had received a lucrative offer to open a new gallery in Chicago. She had left no forwarding address. A search of the studio revealed that Virginia had taken most of her belongings, but in her haste, she had left behind a locked trunk in a storage room. Inside, Caldwell found 9 wigs, each made from hair that matched the descriptions of the missing women, including Lucille Parker. There was also a collection of photographic chemicals, surgical instruments, and a book written in German that appeared to detail rituals involving human hair. Most disturbing of all was a half-finished letter addressed to someone named Eliza in Boston. My dearest Eliza, I am pleased to report that the transformation was a complete success. The vessel performed exactly as Wilhelm said it would. The integration of 9 souls into one form is challenging. At times I feel as if I'm engaged in a constant conversation with 8 other women inside my mind. But the power it has granted me is beyond anything I could have imagined. I can feel their talents becoming my own. The young woman whose body I now inhabit had a natural gift for photography, which complements my own skills beautifully. I find I can work for days without tiring, drawing on the resilience of the 9th addition to my collection. I must leave Indianapolis sooner than planned. The Sheriff Caldwell is more persistent than I anticipated. He has that same look in his eyes that I've seen in others, who sense something unnatural about me but cannot quite identify what it is. I have made arrangements to continue our work in Chicago, where I have identified several promising candidates for the next collection. Within 5 years, I believe I will be ready for another transformation, this time using the enhanced ritual described in the Whitaker family grimoire. I look forward to seeing you again. Remember, when you arrive in Chicago, ask for Virginia Ellis at the Palmer House. I will be watching for a woman with hair as red as autumn leaves. Your faithful friend and mentor, Edwin, though I suppose I must now sign my name as Virginia. Sheriff Caldwell immediately sent telegrams to the Chicago Police Department, providing a detailed description of Virginia Ellis and urging them to apprehend her on suspicion of murder. But despite an extensive search, no trace of her was ever found in Chicago or elsewhere. In the months that followed, Caldwell dedicated himself to researching the cult that had apparently been operating across Europe and America for generations. He discovered references to similar cases dating back to the 16th century, unusual disappearances of people noted for their hair, followed by the emergence of newcomers who quickly established themselves in positions that gave them access to potential victims. The pattern was always the same. 9 victims selected for specific qualities, their hair preserved and combined into a vessel, followed by a ritual in which the collector transferred their consciousness into a new body. The original occupant of that body was apparently suppressed or destroyed in the process, allowing the collector to continue their existence in a new form, enhanced by the qualities of those they had harvested. Most disturbing of all was the cyclical nature of the practice. Each collector seemed compelled to train at least one apprentice to carry on their work, ensuring that the knowledge was never lost. The Whitaker property, it seemed, had been a hub for this activity in America for nearly a century, with the house changing hands through apparent sales that masked the ritual transformations taking place within its walls. Sheriff Caldwell's investigation into this cult consumed the remainder of his career. He collected every scrap of information he could find, building a comprehensive file that he hoped would someday help authorities identify and stop these practitioners before they could claim more victims. But as the years passed and no new cases matching the specific pattern emerged in Indiana, public interest in the Hollister case faded completely. Caldwell's obsession came to be seen as eccentric at best, delusional at worst. When he retired in 1920, his successor quietly archived the Hollister files in the department's basement, where they gathered dust for decades. Thomas Caldwell died in 1932, still convinced that Edwin Hollister, or whatever entity had been inhabiting Hollister's body, was out there somewhere, wearing a new face, collecting new specimens for a never-ending cycle of transformation. He was right. In 1957, a researcher named Margaret Holloway discovered Caldwell's archived files while conducting research for a book on unsolved crimes of the early 20th century. Fascinated by the case, she began her own investigation, tracking reports of missing persons across the United States who matched the profile of Hollister's victims. What she found was chilling. Between 1910 and 1955, there had been at least 6 series of disappearances that followed the pattern Caldwell had identified. 9 victims, all with distinctive hair, taken over a period of approximately 2 years, followed by the emergence of a new identity in a different location. Chicago in 1910 to 1912, Philadelphia in 1921 to 1923, San Francisco in 1932 to 1934, Miami in 1943 to 1945, Boston in 1954 to 1956. In each case, the disappearances had been investigated as separate incidents, with no law enforcement agency making the connection between them. And in each case, a new resident had appeared in another city shortly after the 9th disappearance. Always someone involved in a profession that gave them access to potential victims. A photographer, a hairdresser, a fashion designer, a casting director, a modeling agent. Margaret Holloway published her findings in a book titled The Collectors, America's Most Elusive Serial Killers, which was largely dismissed by the law enforcement community as sensationalist speculation. But the book caught the attention of someone else, someone who had been watching for any sign that their activities had been noticed. 2 months after the publication of her book, Margaret Holloway disappeared from her home in St. Louis. Her manuscript for a planned sequel, which she had told friends would reveal new information about a collector currently active in New Orleans, was never found. In the decades since, there have been occasional reports of similar patterns of disappearances, always 9 victims over approximately 2 years, always with distinctive hair, always followed by the appearance of a newcomer in another city. But these reports remain disconnected, investigated by different agencies in different jurisdictions, with no central database to track and identify the pattern that Thomas Caldwell had recognized over a century ago. And what of the Whitaker property, where it all began? After years of sitting abandoned, the land was eventually purchased by the state of Indiana in 1972 and converted into a nature preserve. The house, long since collapsed from neglect, was cleared away, and the well was filled in. Trees were planted, paths were laid, and the site of so much horror became a place where families gather for picnics and nature walks. Few visitors to the preserve know the history of the land they're enjoying. Viewers still notice the small memorial stone placed near where the well once stood, inscribed with the names of the 8 women whose hair was found braided together: Elizabeth Chambers, Catherine Willoughby, Margaret Simmons, Ann Porter, Sarah Kingsley, Ruth Bennett, Mary Adams, and Dorothea Walsh. But locals tell of strange occurrences in the preserve. Visitors report feeling as if they're being watched. Some claim to have seen a woman with unusual hair that seems to change color in the light, observing them from a distance before disappearing into the trees. Rangers have found small offerings left at the memorial stone, scissors, combs, locks of hair tied with ribbon. And every few years, someone visiting the preserve will report being approached by a well-dressed, artistic-looking individual who offers to take their photograph or comments admiringly on their hair, asking if they might be willing to pose for a portrait. The descriptions of this person vary wildly, sometimes a man, sometimes a woman, sometimes young, sometimes middle-aged. But their manner is always described the same way. Cultured, charming, with an intensity to their gaze that makes one feel as if they're being assessed rather than admired. Park rangers warn visitors not to accept such offers and to report any suspicious individuals immediately. But sometimes, despite these warnings, people do disappear from the area around the preserve. Usually travelers, people passing through who won't be immediately missed. Usually, people noted for their distinctive hair. In the fall of 2020, a photographer named Victoria Hollister opened a new studio in Indianapolis, specializing in portrait photography. Her work quickly gained acclaim for its unique ability to capture the essence of her subjects, particularly women with distinctive features. Victoria is known for her unusual appearance, tall and elegant, with hair that seems to contain strands of every color from platinum blonde to midnight black, which she wears in elaborate styles that draw admiring glances. When asked about her name in interviews, Victoria smiles and explains that she's distantly related to a photographer who worked in the city over a century ago. "It's a family tradition," she says. "We've been capturing beauty for generations." In her studio, behind a locked door, hangs a portrait unlike any other in her collection. It shows 9 women arranged in a circle, their faces blurred, but their hair rendered in exquisite detail. Blonde, brown, red, black, each style distinct and vibrant. And in the center of the circle stands a figure whose features seem to shift and change the longer one looks at it, as if multiple faces were attempting to emerge from a single form. Beneath the portrait hangs a small plaque with an inscription, "The collection 1906 to present, the circle never ends." And somewhere in Indianapolis today, a woman with beautiful hair is making plans to travel alone, unaware that she has already been selected, already been assessed, already been marked as the next addition to a collection that has been growing for over 100 years. If you're watching this video and you have distinctive hair that draws compliments and admiring glances, be careful who you allow to photograph you. Be wary of artistic strangers who pay special attention to your most notable feature, and never, ever travel alone. For the collectors are still among us, wearing faces that are not their own, preserving beauty in ways that defy understanding, transforming themselves again and again in an endless cycle of death and rebirth. And if you find yourself near the nature preserve that once was the Whitaker property, and you see a well-dressed individual watching you from among the trees, do not approach them. Do not accept their compliments or their offers. Turn away. Leave immediately and pray to God and Jesus Christ for protection, for some traditions never die. They merely change their appearance, adapt to new times, and continue their work in the shadows. The collection never ends. The circle is never complete, and somewhere, even now, a braid is being woven, a tag is being engraved, and a name, perhaps your name, is being added to a list that began over a century ago with Elizabeth Chambers and her beautiful golden hair like wheat in the summer.